Welcome to the Collegium, our monthly magazine program in 3 parts: cinema, state of affairs, and our arts calendar. Hello and welcome to the Collegium, our monthly magazine program in 3 parts. This evening we're very pleased to have with us Colonel Howard Baugh, who is a member of the Tuskegee Airmen. Tonight you will have the opportunity to find out the past, the present, and a hopeful long future for the Tuskegee Airmen. Colonel Baugh, welcome to the Collegium.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
I'd like to begin the informational flow by asking you, why are you here in Berlin?
Well, it's Black History Month, and it's appropriate that I come over here and spread the word that I tell about the Tuskegee Airmen and racism and segregation as it was. I was invited by the United States Army, and we are working out of what you might call home based at Wurzburg. And this last couple of weeks I have spoken at a number of military bases and American schools in and around that area. I was invited here by Mr. Frank Reynolds, who is a member of an organization here, to come over and not only speak to some Americans over here, but to also meet with some World War II German fighter pilots and their families. And I'm looking forward to that because I know that's going to be very interesting.
When we speak about Black History Month, many people in Europe are not familiar with it. What is Black History Month, and what is the significance of it? Why is it important, if it is?
Well, it's important because it's an integral part of American history. It has been intentionally or inadvertently omitted from textbooks, history books, in many instances even the media. And the people, the general public, is not aware of what African Americans have done and what their contributions are to the growth and progress in America. And these things need to be brought out. I have heard that it's a shame that we have to have Black History Month, because actually it's all a part of American history. And the only way we're going to get it out, though, is designate a month to concentrate on it and get the word out.
I've heard it said that, how is it that Black History Month can be designated for a people whose history time has not even found it possible to record? How do we propagate or disseminate this point of view and this information throughout the year? Or do you think that that's necessary? Is it only necessary that this information be worked on or told for 1 month? Or what about the other 11 months, in your opinion?
Well, I think that it's important all year, and it should be taught all year. It should be a part of our school curriculum. Blacks and whites shouldn't have to wait until they get to higher education, colleges and universities, to study Black history. It should be taught in the elementary schools, along with all the other American history as it's taught, or world history.
Carter G. Woodson founded Negro History Week, I believe, in 1926. So when you were coming up, when you were coming along, how important or how significant was Black History or Negro History Week, which subsequently became Black History Month?
When I was coming along, and that was in 1926, as you mentioned, I never heard of Black History Week or Black History Month. That is something that has come to my attention in recent years. And I'm sure that it existed back then, but it wasn't as widespread and prevalent as it is now, and wasn't as well known. And I don't think that our people participated and contributed as they do now.
We use the term the Tuskegee Airmen. Could you tell us a little bit about the history of the Tuskegee Institute, and what is the relationship between this institution and the Tuskegee Airmen?
Well, Tuskegee Institute was founded by Booker T. Washington to train black people mostly in the trades so that they would have the ability to earn a living. It has now developed into Tuskegee University, as you know. Tuskegee Institute is close to a town in Alabama, a small town called Tuskegee, Alabama. In 1941, when President Roosevelt directed the armed forces to establish a program and a facility for training blacks as military pilots, a site near Tuskegee Institute and Tuskegee Institute were selected for that training to take place. Tuskegee Institute already had a flying training program called the Civilian Pilot Training Program in place and operating to train young African-American civilians in flying light planes. So they had a basis for their training. They had room on their campus, and the site chosen for Tuskegee Army Airfield, which was about 5 miles or so away from Tuskegee Institute, was under construction. So the first training that we had took place at Tuskegee Institute in an airfield that they already had, a place called Moton Field. During the first third of our actual flying training in airplanes, which we call our basic training phase, took place at Moton Field and at Tuskegee Institute. We were housed and fed at Tuskegee Institute on the campus. We drilled on the campus, and we went to the airfield that was owned by Tuskegee Institute to do our first flying. We flew light airplanes at that time, 2-wing, single-engine, two-place airplane, two-place, two people in the airplane. The instructor rode in the front seat. The cadet rode in the back seat. And our instructors during that phase of our training, which was a full 1/3 of our flying training, were African-American civilian contract pilots. After we finished our primary phase of training at Tuskegee Institute, then we moved over to Tuskegee Army Airfield, which was 5 or 6 miles away, and we went through the rest of our training for the next 3 or 4 months or so. But our instructors then were all white because we didn't have any African-American pilots who were qualified to teach us in that in the types of airplanes that we were flying then.
Could you tell us when and where you were born, and what was the social climate at that time? Could you paint that picture for us?
Well, you said where, not when. So I was born in Petersburg, Virginia, which is about 30 miles south of Richmond, Virginia, the capital of Virginia. And the social situation there was it was segregated. They had black neighborhoods. The schools are segregated, supposedly separate but equal, but we all know better than that. The schools had hand-me-down textbooks and other school supplies that the whites had used and worn out or got tired of or changed to go to better, newer materials. That was we had 3 cars at the time. We didn't have buses, so it was ride in the back of the bus. In the public buildings, there were separate water fountains, and there were separate restrooms for blacks and whites. There were very few jobs available for African Americans. The situation was pretty bad. There was no commingling of the races at all. It was against state law.
With that sort of environment, with the deprivation that depicts, why did young black men wish to become a part of the Tuskegee Airmen, which then could lead them into a situation that might endanger their life and make it more dangerous for them to live than where they already were living?
That's not a difficult question. At that time, there was a Selective Service Act in effect in the United States. The Selective Service law applied to black men just as it did to the whites. They considered us second-class citizens until it came to serving in the military service. Then everything was equal as far as being drafted was concerned. I was classified 1A, and if I hadn't volunteered to go into the Army Air Corps, I would have been drafted anyway into the ground forces. And I knew that I would rather be flying than in the ground forces. I'd always wanted to fly. Of course, I didn't have any money to buy flying time. Even some of our Tuskegee Airmen I've talked to who did have money to buy flying time couldn't find a white instructor with an airplane who would teach them to fly. They just refused to teach African Americans to fly airplanes. One of the chief instructors who was down at Tuskegee, who actually was the one who flew Eleanor Roosevelt in the airplane when she went down to Tuskegee, had tried to buy flying time. Couldn't find anybody who would teach him to fly, so he bought his own airplane and taught himself to fly it, and flew it right up until into his 80s, and he died 4 or 5 years ago. But he was still flying.
You mentioned Eleanor Roosevelt. For people who don't know, could you tell us a little bit about her contributions to American democracy, she and her husband?
Well, I don't know whether I can cover all of her contributions to American democracy, but the part that I can tell is that it had been determined way back in 1925 when the Army War College conducted a study to determine how African Americans could best be utilized in the armed forces. And they determined or concluded that we were lacking in intelligence, that we didn't have the intestinal fortitude to face an enemy without panicking and running, that we thought of ourselves as being inferior to whites, that we certainly didn't have the intelligence and the dexterity to operate a machine as complicated as an airplane. During those years after that and up until 1941, there was a lot of opposition to that policy, of course, because the Army Air Corps would not, and neither would the other services, accept African Americans for training as combat pilots. The opposition to that policy came from the NAACP, the Urban League, the black press, and influential people, both black and white, and notably Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, who bent the president's ear, I suppose, and persistently, so that in early 1941 he directed the Army Air Corps to establish a program and a training facility to train African Americans as combat pilots.
Just staying with Eleanor Roosevelt a moment, what effect was her support for Marian Anderson to sing when the Daughters of American Revolution refused to allow her to sing? And she then sang, I think, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Those kinds of activities by Mrs. Roosevelt, how did that impact upon the black and white community at that time? And this was 1939, if I recall.
I don't really think I'm qualified to answer that question in whole. I do know that Marian Anderson was refused an appearance at the Daughters of the American Revolution, wherever it was. And I heard that Mrs. Roosevelt was instrumental in arranging her to have a concert, but that's about all I know about it.
I'm looking for those instances of moral support for the black community. For instance, I've read that when Joe Louis would fight, Joe Louis, every radio that was available at that time would be turned to the fight, and that this was a source of inspiration. Where were the sources of inspiration for the Tuskegee Airmen, for those men who had been taught that they were valueless except in certain circumstances where they might risk their lives? Where were the psychological, social support systems? From where did they come to enable the men, and yourself included, to overcome these tremendous obstacles?
Well, I don't think it was a great deal to overcome. Many whites felt that we were second-class citizens, that we couldn't fly airplanes, and certainly not military aircraft in combat.
What I'm interested in, Colonel, is finding your experiences as a source of inspiration for people who find themselves in great difficulty today, for various reasons. We have a tremendous problem in the United States with poverty, poor schools, HIV, AIDS, broken families, plus the problems, the age-old problems that haven't been solved to this day. How did those men and you survive some of those very similar problems when you were in the Tuskegee Airmen? And what source of inspiration and information can you offer the adults and youth of today?
That might take all night to answer.
You're on.
Yeah, I'm on. I was born in the South. I was born into racism and segregation. I went to segregated schools to start with. I rode on the back of the streetcar. I drank out of separate water fountains, and I used separate restrooms marked colored and white. But I never thought of myself as being second class to anybody. And I think that was one of the things that was evident in most of the people who went to be the pilot training at Tuskegee. We didn't consider ourselves second class. We felt that if we had an opportunity, that we could do what anybody else could do. It's strange that many white people feel that black people cannot do things that they can do. Men even feel that women can't do what they can do. But we find that that isn't true in either case. But to get back to the race thing, we lost 32 pilots, shot down or forced down, who survived and became prisoners of war of Germany. And one of them came back to the States and said that when he was being interrogated by the German intelligence officer, one of the questions he was asked was, why is it that you people fight so hard for a country that treats you so poorly? I never heard what his answer was, but he probably didn't have a good one, because the question probably caught him off guard. Like me, and probably all the other Tuskegee Airmen who over here fighting in combat, the question never came up in our minds. We never had any doubt that what we were doing was the right and proper thing to do. To go even further with that, I feel that African Americans are as much American as European Americans. And at that time in history, in our country, that covered just about everybody, because there were very few Orientals and very few people of Latin descent. The European Americans came across the North Atlantic, the same we all came across, our ancestors all came across the same ocean. The European Americans came across the Northern Atlantic mostly voluntarily to get away from conditions in Europe. They were going to where they thought life would be better, and it was. A few came as indentured servants. Maybe they had no choice. I don't know. But those that came across the southern Atlantic out of Western Africa in the holds of slave ships, in shackles, in deplorable conditions. Some died en route and were thrown overboard. But we all came across the same ocean. We feel that America is much ours as theirs, although we came against our will. There are still a lot of die-hard racists in our country. But not just in our country. It's prevalent in Germany right now. You got the skinheads and the neo-Nazis. We've got a lot of hate groups in America right now. In 1999, there were over 7,000 hate crimes committed in the United States. More than half were based on race. I thought there was only 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 white racist groups in America, but I read recently that there are over 450. What can be done? I don't know. Education is one thing. Maybe people will stop tolerating racism. I hope so. Racism starts in the home. Sometimes it's even taught. Very often it just rubs off because kids learn quickly and easily from what they see. So it's learned in the home. It is spread in the schools and the neighborhoods and perpetuated by people who tolerate it. I've seen sometime last year a clip television segment on the Ku Klux Klan where they showed the Ku Klux Klan rally with their white robes and the white hoods and little kids with them in white robes and white hoods. One babes in arms, white robes and white hood. So it's being taught right from the cradle to some people. And it's hard for them to accept the fact that the United States is getting to be more and more diverse with races. We should be teaching tolerance instead of racism, because that's the thing of the future. Sometime during this century, the whites will not be a majority in the United States. In fact, there will be no one racial majority in the United States. If you take all the minorities, the Hispanics or Latins, and the Orientals, African American, and put them together, we will outnumber the whites.
Tell us a little bit about the training that you went through when you were with the airmen. What sort of training did you undergo? How long was the training? What was involved with learning to become a pilot?
Well, I went to Tuskegee right from civilian life as an aviation cadet, and there were 20 aviation cadets in my class. The classes were small at that time. They got larger later on. The first month that we were in training, most of us just come out of civilian life, and we didn't know who to salute or what to salute or how to march and customs of the service and all those kind of things. So we spent the first month doing that, who to salute and who to say sir to, and how to address non-commissioned officers. And we did a lot of physical training, athletics, and we had a lot of ground school work in the classroom. We were taught basic navigation and the Morse code and some rudiments of meteorology, which are all important to flying an airplane. That went on for about a month. Then we went to what was the basic training, which was in the first time we got into an airplane. And that training was in a small two-wing airplane that cruised about 90 miles an hour and it was a two-seat airplane, single engine. And we went up and had the airplane demonstrated to us and some maneuvers demonstrated to us, and then the instructor would let us fly the airplane and correct our mistakes and work with us to get through the maneuvers, and that went on for a while. And then we started trying to learn how to land the airplane, and we would try to land the airplane. The instructor would land the airplane first and demonstrate it, and we'd go around and come back and do it again. And then we'd come back, and the cadet in the back seat would try to land the airplane, and the instructor would follow him through to make sure he didn't drag a wing. Everything went okay. And we did stalls and loops and spins and all kinds of things in the air with the airplane. And when the instructor felt after about 10 or 12 hours or so that we could handle the airplane alone without killing ourselves, and he would get out and let us solo. And that first phase of training was about 5 or 6 weeks, and it was all done at Moulton Field, which was a big open grass field, no pavement at all. And we just landed in whichever direction that we landed into the wind, whichever direction the wind was blowing. After that phase of our training, we moved over to Tuskegee Army Airfield, which was still under construction, but the runways had been put in and the ramps and everything. So we got into a little heavier, a little more high-performance airplane called the BT-13. But it had fixed landing gear, and we had to crank the flaps down. But it was the first airplane we had flown that had flaps. And it had not a variable speed, but a two-position propeller, which was different to us, too, because the primary planes we had been flying only had a single-position propeller. And we stayed in that phase of training and went through some of the same things, loops and spins and formation. We got into formation flying then, and instrument flying, and that lasted another 5 or 6 weeks. And then we got into the advanced trainer, which was in the T6, which was even higher performance airplane. And it had hydraulically operated flaps and retractable landing gear and a variable pitch propeller, still all one engine though, and 2 seats. And we did some of the same things in that airplane, and we did night flying and formation flying and night cross-country and daytime cross-country flights, and sometimes with instructors, and then later on solo. And the whole training program from the time we first got to Tuskegee until I graduated was about 7 months.
How were candidates selected to become airmen? Well,
the individuals who wanted to go to pilot training had to make application. We had to take a physical exam. We had to have 20/20 vision and hearing. Had to be physically fit. We had to, during the physical exam, we were tested for our depth perception, and we had to take a written exam. I had no problem with any of that, not even with the application, but many people reported that they did have trouble with the application. In many instances around the country, the applications were refused by the people taking the applications, who were all white. One pilot told us, related the fact that he was told when he first made the application that the Air Corps didn't need any night fighters. Sometimes people put in application and it seemed that everything was going well, but they didn't know that once they left the office, the application went into the barrel, went into the trash basket. Unfortunately, some people took no for an answer. Fortunately, some people did not take no for an answer, so they applied someplace else. And some of them got in. For reasons I don't understand, I don't know, I didn't have that kind of problem. I went right straight through.
Could you paint us a picture? Oh, sorry.
Oh, just one other thing too. At that time, you had to have at least 2 years of college. And I was in my senior year of college when I made my application. Later on, when I think they learned that high school students could also fly airplanes, all you had to have was a high school diploma to get into training and make application. We had people who were so young when they went over and flew combat. I remember one particular captain that came back from combat after the war was over. He was still so young he had to get permission from his parents to get married, and he didn't have a driver's license. But he had flown combat.
Could you paint us a picture of what it was like for black and perhaps Asian people during World War II?
I'm not sure I understand the question too well. Because we were all in segregated units. The Japanese, mostly on the West Coast, were herded into concentration camps. They called them internment camps, but and they were maybe just one step above concentration camps. I don't know. Some of them volunteered, and some of them were drafted. I forget the number. I think it was the 442nd Infantry Division that they went into, and they had a remarkable, commendable record in combat. African American units were all segregated, except for the higher ranking officers in those organizations who were white. There were very few African American officers at the beginning of the war. Most of them were second lieutenants or first lieutenants, but the higher officers were always white, and they always answered to white officers. The last segregated all-black unit, I think, was an Army unit in Korea in 1950. The Tuskegee Airmen were trained at Tuskegee Army Airfield, which operated from 1941 to 1946, and only African Americans and some Haitians, I think, maybe some Africans from Africa, were also trained there because they wouldn't train them anyplace else. But only dark-skinned people were trained at Tuskegee, and no whites were trained there ever. After we got into combat, we were a separate segregated unit, the 99th Fighter Squadron, and later the 100th, the 301st, and the 302nd Fighter Squadron that made up the 332nd Fighter Group were comprised of all African Americans, not only the pilots, but all the ground support people also, our mechanics, doctors, truck drivers, cooks, bakers, everything it takes to support a fighter group were African Americans. When we were at Ramitelli, north of Foggia, on the east coast of Italy, during 1944 and 45, we had a whole black city. Everything on it was black, except an occasional Italian who would come on base to swap something, some fresh vegetables or fresh eggs, for some of our issue things like cigarettes and shaving cream and toothpaste and stuff like that. Those were the only white faces we saw, unless one of the bombers that was crewed by white people had to make an emergency landing at our field and couldn't get back to their own. And they were surprised to find that African Americans were flying those P-51s with the red tails. And they were also surprised that our mechanics, who had been working only on fighter planes, which had an inline engine, entirely different from the radial engines that they had on the bombers, that our people could also fix the airplanes and send them on their way, and they did on many instances.
What was the response when you were in North Africa and the other troops were in Europe? What was the response of those people to these people from the United States who had black skins?
Well, the response of the native people in North Africa and in Sicily and in Italy, the indigenous people there, welcomed us. They had absolutely nothing against us. And in England, that was true also. There wasn't so much hate spread in North Africa against us by the whites, or in Sicily, or in Italy that I know of. But I do know that in England, there was a lot of false rumors about African Americans passed among the English population. They said some derogatory things about African Americans that the English believed. And they had a misconception of what African Americans were like that weren't true. But they believed them. Unless people personally get to know people of other races, religions, and ethnic groups, it's easy to believe ugly things about them. And of course, there's always somebody who wants to say ugly things about them. I was telling you just before we started this about the book that Vernon Baker wrote called Lasting Valor. He's the only living African American to have received the Congressional Medal of Honor. It was awarded to him by President Clinton, along with about 6 other African Americans who were no longer living and couldn't make the appearance at the White House for the presentation, but their families did. But Vernon Baker was there, and he wrote a book, a very good book, and I recommend it highly. The name of the book is Lasting Valor. And he said that when he was coming back from the United States after the war on a ship that stopped in England for a few days, an English girl asked him if he would show her his tail. I don't know what his response was. He didn't say in the book what his response or reaction was to that. I think he should have showed her.
I want to talk to you about the 477th Bombardment Group. But before that, I'd like for you to tell us what, in your opinion, were the accomplishments of the 332nd Fighter Group?
Well, first of all, they said we couldn't fly. During the 5 years that Tuskegee Army Airfield was in operation, we graduated almost 1,000, 900 and some pilots with silver wings, all African Americans. 450 of us went overseas to fly combat in Europe in fighter aircraft. We flew in Europe 4 different types of fighter aircraft. The P-39, which was obsolete when the war started. It was such an inferior airplane that the English refused to accept it, but we gave some to the Russians. We also flew the P-40, and we flew that for a year in close support work, dive bombing and strafing the enemy close to our own friendly lines. We flew the P-47 in combat for about a month, but then we got the P-51, and we got that in the spring of 1944 and kept it for the rest of the war. The P-51 was probably the best fighter plane that either side had during World War II. Although they said we couldn't fly, we flew over 15,000 sorties. We escorted bombers on over 200 missions. We had a unique record of never having lost a bomber that we were escorting to enemy fighters. I say unique because we're the only fighter group that could make that statement. We destroyed about 150 aircraft in the air. We destroyed another 250 enemy aircraft on the ground, and any number of large gun positions and trains and convoys and things like that. 2 of our pilots, while they were flying the P-47, which had 8 50 caliber machine guns mounted in the wings, were coming back from a mission up north, well, north of Italy, Austria or someplace, saw a German destroyer in the Adriatic Sea up there and decided that they might as well expend some bullets on it and do some damage. And they went down and they opened fire, and there was a big explosion on the ship, and the ship sank. It's the only time such a feat has been accomplished by airplanes just using machine guns, before or since. Of course, both of them got the Distinguished Flying Cross for that action. We lost 66 pilots killed in combat, and we had 32 shot down, or forced down in enemy territory for one reason or another, and they became prisoners of war.